What's up, everybody? I'm the Archivic, and welcome to another live stream from the Midwestern Marx Institute for Marxist Theory and Political Analysis. I'm very excited about the stream this afternoon, as a mainstream media pundit named Jesse Kelly wrote a book a while ago that I just became aware of called the Anticommunist Manifesto. And I began skimming it. I wanted to sort of see what this Anti-Communist Manifesto was all about. And as it turns out, like most quote unquote anti-communism, it's complaining about some real things and then calling them communism when they have nothing whatsoever to do with communism. Makes a mockery of just the field of historical study in general, all kinds of stuff like that. So we're going to get into just reading from the book and explaining what's real, what's not, etc. And I'll tell you a funny story about Jesse Kelly and his followers read bots that bothered me earlier today. So let's get to it right after the international.
Cannot be solved without a radical redistribution of political and economic power.
All right, welcome back, everybody. So yeah, this morning I got a hankering to read some mainstream media. I don't know why I punish myself like that, but I do. So I start looking for at first something I could get for free and see if I could, if it's worth buying. And I get recommended this book, the Anti-Communist Manifesto. So I looked for a copy of that, and I almost found one, but I ended up not being able to use it. There was something going on with the link I got sent. So by the way, my camera's all weird. We're gonna fix that. There we go. There's something wrong with the link I got sent, so I ended up having to buy an ebook copy and make my own PDF so I can share it on stream. So I thought one might be good because when I noticed it, I said I was going to do this. The author of the book, Jesse Kelly, who's an interesting character, we'll get into that in a minute, quote tweeted me, and immediately it seemed like he was a little scared. Maybe he was like, this guy's gonna lie, he's gonna lie, I promise he's gonna lie. Like, come on, are you for real? Have the courage of your convictions. If you're gonna call yourself an anti-communist, stand up like a man and maybe answer the communist who's going to criticize what you write. You know what I mean? Without he's lying, blah blah blah. We'll see who's lying. We'll go through his sources, which nothing is cited. Actually, it's just he kind of lists where we should assume he got things from without telling us what it's gotten from or when, etc. But just talk, right? Rather than trying to poison the well like that, right? Anyway, so I get attacked immediately by 60 replies all at the same time, which I thought was kind of funny. But he's welcome to come have a conversation anytime he wants. I'd be happy to talk to him and school him, because in the very first section of his book, it becomes painfully obvious that not only has he not read the very basic things, like he quotes the Communist Manifesto, and it's very clear he hasn't read that, because what he's saying is precisely the opposite of what Marx and Engels are saying in the Communist Manifesto. So, yeah, it's wild. So anyway, this guy, Jesse Kelly, he is an employee of iHeart Media, which is the new corporation formed out of the bones of Clear Channel, which is part of what we call the mainstream media apparatus, the corporate cartel that controls all of mainstream media, what gets said, how often it gets said, what discourse is sort of acceptable, right? And so what happens with people like this is they generally just call everything the libs are doing communism, try to connect that to distortions of historical experiences with communism, or even what's happening with communism now, such as in China, right? And then sort of make it about the culture war, right? The libs versus conservatives, blah, blah, blah. All we can do is argue pointlessly and endlessly about, whether we're woke or anti-woke. What? I mean, come on. Anyway, so that's how we sort of got started in this. I think it's interesting, though, that a lot of conservatives hate the mainstream media, right? Hate it. Will say that it's the number one enemy of the American people. Yet they're buying this book and trusting this Clear Channel, iHeart Media lackey to tell them the truth about the political enemies of the globalists, right? The people they call globalists, who, we just call the ruling class or whatever. I don't care what language we use. I'll happily say globalists. It's globalized financial capital, right? So, anyway, I completely lost my train of thought because I'm sitting here looking at the book right now, and even the opening line is absurd, right? With no substantiation whatsoever. He says communism is an evil, demonic religion, and it has infected America to its bones. It will tear this nation apart if it is not driven from our shores. And I want to be sort of clear that this part here is going to connect to his sort of mission. He wants to call on everybody to become an anti-communist, to drive this specter haunting America from our shores, right? And dedicate their lives to a struggle they can never win, basically. And he says as much, right? That they're doing something for someone else, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, so I figured what I could do here, let's get this PDF I made up on screen. All right, there we go. Oh, that's not big enough. Hold on. Let me switch the view here. I apologize. There we go. Can you all read that? All right. So let's go from that second part, and I'll sort of skip around so we can get to the meat and potatoes of what he's saying, because that's where it gets just absurd. America is on the verge of defeat, brothers and sisters, he says. As a nation, she is unrecognizable from what she was a century ago, and that's true, right? Capitalism, the system we live under, has gotten us here, right? Where our infrastructure is crumbling. Our schools are not teaching us how to think critically, not preparing us for the real world, but teaching us to memorize things, right? And in this way, when the ruling institutions, the ruling class, the elites, the globalists, whatever you want to call them, have control over the institutions that create our preconceptions, that memorization can be used towards whatever ends they need it to be used, right? Towards that constant and unending bickering back and forth that goes nowhere. Anyway, a year ago, yesterday, the ideals, principles, and foundations that once made her the envy of the free world have been eroded to the point of non-existence. All that remains is for a gentle push to send her over the edge. Picture in your mind a person who is damaging information against the Clintons and is teetering on the edge of a cliff with Hillary in a three-point stance behind them. That's America right now. I don't think he's wrong about that. I really don't. We're and he's going to get to this in the next part, though. I do believe this nation's at a crossroad. The issue is he thinks this is because communists have sneakily infiltrated the CIA and the FBI and all of these capitalist institutions, right? And slowly changed it all to communism. It's all communism. Look out, right? He says that this isn't a crossroads. That things could go either way. It's not the case, right? America chose a path long ago, he says. Now we stand within the sight of the journey's dark end. Bleh, bleh, bleh. And the next, I'll skip. Oh, no, this part's good. You no doubt see it every day on your television screens, in the news you read, in the entertainment you consume, in the incessant jabbering of the wildebeest on the view. In the syllabus your son or daughter brings home from school, you can practically taste it in the air around you. A bitter cocktail of divisiveness, self-hatred, perpetual victimhood, and degeneracy. It's just not communism. All the while, there has been someone leading the way. For generations, he's been guiding us. Sometimes he operates in the shadows, while at others, he works in the open. He seduces us, gently taking our hands and whispering in our ears stories of a better tomorrow. He threatens us, shouting about the end of the world and warning of impending doom if we stray from the path. Worst of all, he deceives us, clouding our judgment with lies and making false promises he never intends to keep. He is the communist. Some sort of substantiation will be nice, but I think his idea is he's going to prove this in his book, right? But Jesse, I already hear you asking, are our political enemies really communists, or are you being dramatic? I assure you that I'm not being dramatic. The enemy we face are really communists. And as I will demonstrate, they're just as devoted to this dangerous religion as their forebears in the Soviet Union or the contemporaries in the People's Republic of China. So what he's basically saying is the people, the woke rad lib types that the Chinese people call Baizu, are actually secretly religiously motivated communists, right? The communism is actually their religion. Not that they have no idea what communism is, it's their religion. They are so dedicated, right? He kind of like fear mongers for a bit. He says communism is the height of evil, or the communist is the height of evil. He is walking death. I know this because I understand history. Trust me. I understand what he is capable of. And as we speak, he is all around us. I'm hoping to pass on that understanding to you in the pages ahead. I want you to understand why the communist is evil, how history demonstrates his depravity beyond a shadow of a doubt, and how he is currently operating in our midst. People ask me all the time if they should be afraid. The answer to that is yes, you should be very afraid. However, and here's where he gets us, right? You should know there is hope. We don't have to sit idly by and continue to act as spectators of America's destruction. This thing, this boogeyman I'm making up and calling the communist is not invincible. Don't worry, guys. In the pages that follow, I will outline not only the challenges we face, but specific steps you can take to defeat the communists. Well, thank God. We got steps. We got steps. All right. So, chapter 1. That's just his intro. Powerful stuff, right? It's basically just, here's a bunch of evil stuff. I hate evil stuff. We should all be afraid of the evil stuff. But don't worry, we can fight back, right? It's wild. Like, this is like, I've read the Nazi propagandists and their theorists even to a somewhat limited extent. And this sounds a lot like the way they talked about communism. For real, they just always said it was a communist Jew. That's it. Or at least the Nazis did, right? So let's continue. Right. Marxist saw it says something funny here. That's the key to anti-communism. Be afraid. Always coward out. Ay. All right. He asked if we've ever been to the mountains, because if we have, we'd see a curious sight. A boulder somehow shattered into a million pieces. It's a fascinating occurrence. When you lay eyes on it, the first thing that might cross your mind is to wonder what force of nature could possibly have destroyed a boulder so large and strong. The answer to that is water. Boulders will develop cracks over time, and inevitably, rainwater or runoff from melting snow will seep into those cracks. A freeze will come, the water will expand. Ultimately, the force of that frozen water destroys the boulder. Natural progress of this boulder becoming this broken apart, busted up boulder, right? And that's just how nature works, right? In history, this is how societies have always functioned. A new order begins forming within the old one. And as the old one becomes impossible to continue on through the contradictions inherent in that old order that were there and developing all along, a new one takes its place. This is how capitalism itself formed, right? If it wasn't for the 1776 revolution, we'd all have English accents, mate. And this would be part of the British Empire, right? But that's not what happened. The bourgeois revolution happened. The establishment of home rule happened, right? The establishment, the beginning of the creation of the American people, our people. That happened, right? And that continues going on. And it gets to a point again where it's impossible to continue on in that old way, which I think is what he's describing even above here, right? That this nation stands at a cross. Well, he says it's not a crossroads, but I'm calling it a crossroads, where we can choose to sort of fall in lockstep with the establishment, like the guys who employ Jesse Kelly in the mainstream media. We can all hate each other and argue with each other pointlessly about things that don't matter, or we can get together and fight for what's in our common interests, right? The leeches that exist as parasites on our backs, that ruling class, the globalists that the right wingers already hate, So he says that the communist is the water in the boulder example, right? Your society is a boulder. Societies over time will develop cracks just like the boulder. Little weaknesses that don't appear important at first, but they're everything to the communist, right? He will find them, fill them, freeze them, and destroy your society unless he is stopped. What he's saying is that he is positioned to stop history from moving forward. That all of the natural faults within our society, we just have to deal with, right? If food is becoming impossible for regular Americans to buy, we just got to deal with it, man. Sorry. That's the boulder. We can't let the boulder get destroyed. He says the communist is not the worker. He is not the aggrieved peasant. He doesn't have a specific label. He is the bitter, envious malcontent in your society. Communism is the religion of the malcontent. And here, there's no source backing this up. He's just making things up, right? It's wild. Like, do people not check? Where does this come from? What communist wrote anything like that? What communist society has embraced anything like that? None. It sounds like this guy is malcontent to me, if you ask me. I don't know. He says that the malcontent is drawn to this religion because it promises him power. If communists were so drawn to power, why are we always siding against the powerful? Wouldn't it make more sense to toady up to them and work for them like you do, Jesse Kelly? You're the guy who works for iHeart Media, my friend, not the communists, right? Communists traditionally have fought against that power, right? I mean, okay, sure. Yeah, promise of power. Power to exact vengeance on the neighbor who has what he wants. Source. Power to satisfy whatever sadistic desires he feels compelled to carry out. Again, source. Blah, blah, blah. Communism is a religion, blah, blah, blah. No evidence. Where does it come from? Like every religion, it has a prophet and scripture, right? It's found in scripture, the Communist Manifesto. Okay, so what is the Communist Manifesto? It was a political program put forward by the International Working Men's Association, right? Not a theoretical text. It was not a sort of like guidebook for anything at all. Now here's where he's going to go into a ridiculous cartoon of Marx and Engels, which it's going to be good. Don't worry. All right. So he says that blah blah blah. They over the course of their lifetimes, Marx and Engels wrote countless volumes outlining and justifying their faith. Okay, let's go into one and how that works and how it's faith, right? He's never going to justify this claim because there's no justification for it. If you understand what Marxism even is, if you understand dialectical logic, right, it comes from, and you can get this from a very short essay by Lenin called 3 Sources and 3 Components of Marxism. It comes from German continental philosophy, Hegel as the most advanced philosophical system for understanding the general in reality, right? Dialectical logic. It comes from British political economy. John Locke is big. Adam Smith is big. David Ricardo is big. And French revolutionary doctrines. Liberty, equality, fraternity turning into what it turned into, right? And understanding the lessons of that, the Paris Commune, Reconstruction, etc. Anyway, so he's going to summarize the manifesto for us. So thank God for that. We don't have to read it ourselves, right? Just take Jesse Kelly's word for it. The guy who works for iHeart Media, right? All right. He says that human history is a war between 2 classes, workers and capitalists. Wrong. That is specifically not what Marx says. What Marx says is that the history of all class society is a history of struggles between different classes, not just workers and capitalists, right? He even says in a foreword to Capital Volume 1, which if you actually did the work to understand this thing you literally dedicated your life to hating, which it surprises me you wouldn't want to understand what it is, or maybe it doesn't, you would know this, right? You would have read this foreword where he says that, no credit is due him for discovering class struggle or for discovering the anatomy of the classes. Long before him, bourgeois thinkers were doing just that. James Madison, he cites, right? He cites Madison in that foreword. It's the bare minimum of research and actually looking into what it is you want to talk about is necessary, right? So either one, Jesse Kelly is here lying by presenting himself as some kind of expert, because this is literally just like one of the most basic things, even opening up the Communist Manifesto would have taught him, or 2, he has done that, and he's directly lying to his readers. And now, here's my thing. I'm a patriotic kind of guy, right? I'm a communist because I love my country. I want what's best for it. I want what's best for my family, my coworkers, my neighbors, etc. Right? And so when you're lying to the American people, my people, on behalf of the people you work for in the mainstream media, that's a problem for me. That don't sit well. Why do you need to lie if your anti-communism is so correct? Why can't you address the actual substance like a man and argue against it? The reason is because, to quote Che Guevara, I can't help it if reality is Marxist. Right? If he tells the truth about what Marx was actually saying, people go, "Oh, that just makes perfect sense. It's kind of common sense." Anyway, we'll get to all this. Don't worry. We've only been going for about a half hour now. We got a lot more to get over. I'm thinking, by the way, I want to make this a sort of series, right? Where I'm not even just going to go over this book, but a bunch of big ones like this. I'll go over that whole Black Book of Communism. That'll be a fun one. All right. Anyway, the second point he brings up: the working class will rise up and destroy the capitalist class and the society they've built, and it will be replaced by a workers' paradise. No one ever says the words workers' paradise. What are you talking about? Right? For Marx, and for history in general, right? Because this is just how it works. There's no such thing as static states of being. Things are always in motion. And what Marxism is trying to understand is how that motion works, right? What leads to change, and why the interests of the producers of commodities, for example, are directly opposed to the owners. And it has a lot to do with how we reproduce ourselves as human beings, right? Why are we human? It's because of our ability to hold an image of changed nature in our heads and labor in order to carry that out, right? Labor is sort of what makes us human, what kicks us off and starts us growing thumbs and producing language and all of that. And so when we must sell our labor, right, and then the product of it is the value we create is alienated from us and then abstracted and only realized again through money. The MCM is the name. We won't get into that. All that. It's this sort of disconnect we get, right, from Marx. And that's how dialectical logic views it. We can get into all that later if we get a little more theoretical, but let's continue on. The outcome is preordained. The workers' victory is inevitable and will unfold across every corner of the world. That's kind of true. Yeah, well, he actually says that either the working class will eventually overcome the conditions that keep it, to use the modern phrase, working paycheck to paycheck, unable to afford a $500 emergency, which is, the vast majority of Americans in 2024, or it'll result in the dissolution of both classes and we'll have a sort of like collapse. So there's that. Marx's prophecy speaks to the loser because it sets him above all other people and tells him that he will inherit the world. Marx's prophecy speaks to the loser because it sets him above all other people and tells him that he will inherit the world. First of all, Marx was making a historical observation here, not a prophecy. I think the dishonest use of language is both childish and dishonest. See, for me, how I was taught to be a man, right, is that a man doesn't have to stoop to such things, right? A man can sort of stand up and say what he means. He doesn't have to lie about some perceived opponent. He trusts in the strength of his own self and his own ideas. That's just me, though. I mean, who knows? Jesse Kelly, she may be not open to that kind of thing. Anyway, the loser. First of all, this doesn't set anyone above all other people, right? This is talking about those people who have set themselves above all other people already, eventually are going to run out of rope, right? The contradiction between these two sections of people gets to a breaking point. It just does. And this has happened over and over and over again throughout history. So, like, loser, which is strange, doesn't make sense, it doesn't have a reason for it, right? And then above the world, blah, 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 blah. He describes the communist as the most advanced and resolute section of the working class parties of every country. That's true. What he's talking about are political organizations and how advanced or not advanced that their sort of theory and practice are. And at the time, he was not wrong. Sorry, Jesse, he just wasn't. Deal with history, my friend. Okay, so he says that Marx and Engels were two men who never engaged in any work themselves, which is strange. Because in a few sentences, he's going to point out a couple jobs that Marx had. Karl Marx was a fat and lazy man who spent his days living up the generosity of his parents and wealthy friends. Untrue. Marx had many jobs throughout his life, including writing for the Republican Party newspaper in the United States of America as their I think, British correspondent at the time, maybe a London correspondent. Yeah, so there's one. He developed multiple journals and magazines himself. He was never rich. Don't get me wrong. Never, ever, ever. That wasn't how working people lived, ever. He was definitely part of the working class, but he would say himself that he was not proletarian. He was not like sort of imbuing these commodities and generalized commodity production with value, but instead doing this intellectual work. And I mean, I'm sorry, but if we're talking about work, you produce something like Capital instead of this nonsense, Jesse. Come on. I mean, if we're comparing a book that has literally been the foundation for radical changes in the world versus this silliness, there's no comparison at all, right? So the notion that he's like saying Marx never did any work is strange, especially because he points out the only jobs he ever held were as a journalist and writer. A bunch of other weird stuff he doesn't back up with any facts. Now, I think he has some like sources on this down in the bibliography, but the problem with that is that he doesn't link them up, right? I can't take a section, this is what it's from, and then go look that up. The problem with not having that is that it makes it difficult to go verify his sources because I don't know which one he's talking about, right? He sort of goes into saying Marx was a dandy who spent his, no, this is Engels. I'm sorry. He was bankrolled by Engels apparently without making money of his own, blah, blah, blah. Let's just go on to the next actual substantive point rather than his silliness, right? The theory of the communists may be summed up in the single sentence, abolition of private property, from the Communist Manifesto, right? He says, read that again, tattoo it on your mind, marvel at its simplicity. This is what motivates the communist. His core belief sits in direct opposition to the principles of liberty, central to which is the right to own property and keep the fruits of your labor. He wants to destroy everything you have. Now, I've explained this, first of all, mistranslated quote from Marx many times. Marx doesn't use the word abolish as if there's some sort of empty abolition for dialectical logic, which if you'd actually studied Marxism, Jesse, you would know there's no such thing as an empty negation like that. All negation is at the same time the negation of that negation. It's the creation of the positive creation of something new, right? And what he's talking about, and what's funny is he doesn't even read the section of the manifesto this is from. This is crazy. Let me show you the actual manifesto. Hold on. Share screen. Where is it? Manifesto of the Communist Party. All right. Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize. Let me get here. Where is it? Why is my thing not working? I am so sorry, y'all. Here, let's do this. We'll search for the word again. All right. And we'll go down to it. Here we go. We communists have been reproached with the desire of abolishing the right of personally acquiring property as the fruit of a man's own labor, which property is alleged to be the groundwork of all personal freedom, activity, and independence. This is exactly what Mr. Kelly here is alleging. Hard-won, self-acquired, self-earned property. Do you mean the property of petty artisans and of the small peasant? A form of property that preceded the bourgeois form. There's no need to abolish that. The development of industry has to a great extent already destroyed it and is still destroying it daily. Or do you mean the modern bourgeois private property? But does wage labor create any property for the laborer? Not a bit. It doesn't, right? It creates capital, i.e., that kind of property which exploits wage labor and which cannot increase except upon condition of begetting a new supply of wage labor for fresh exploitation. Property in its present form is based on the antagonism of capital and wage labor. Right? Let's go down to the next one because there's more good ones. So here he's talking about the same thing. You are horrified at our intending to do away with private property. But in your existing society, private property is already done away with for 9/10 of the population. And in the USA in 2024, it's even more. Almost every single American has a zero or less than zero net worth. Up to about 70% of Americans work paycheck to paycheck, owning no bourgeois private property, which if you'd actually read this very simple, very short book, literally only 68 pages, you would know. You approach us, therefore, with intending to do, let me do the whole quote. In your existing society, private property is already done away with for 9/10 of the population. Its existence for the few, the globalists, the elites, right, is solely due to its non-existence in the hands of those 9/10. You reproach us, therefore, with intending to do away with a form of property, the necessary condition for whose existence is the non-existence of any property for the immense majority of society. In one word, you reproach us with intending to do away with your property. Precisely so. That is just what we intend. Now, what does that sound like to you? To me, that sounds like you will own nothing and be happy. The World Economic Forum Great Reset agenda. I mean, read the actual book and you'd see that half of the things that you hate, we call capitalism and also hate it. Everyone who gets taken in by this scumbag working for the mainstream media, whose job it is to get you to hate other working class people with your same interests, should just look into it, right? The guy is clearly lying. I literally just read from the book he's pretending to quote to you. I mean, come on. Wild. I don't like how it doesn't leave the background up when I turn the screen thing off. Well, let's share it and we'll get back to his. All right, there we go. The communist lives to destroy property, destroy his opposition, and destroy the very foundations of society. Marx was just railing that the capitalists are who are destroying property, destroying the foundations of society, who destroyed everything and tossed all the traditional relations up into the wind. And this is what he calls modernity, right? He says that it's basically a trauma. Anyway, that gets a little deep. Let's continue on with this thing. It's important to understand that communism is not an ideology, but he obviously has no idea what an ideology is, but rather, as I've already said, a religion. True? In many ways, it's the polar opposite of Christianity, which is funny because most American communists have been Christians. The American revolutionary tradition is absolutely wrapped up with the Christian church, especially the Black church. It's wild. Like half the leaders of the Communist Party USA have been Christians. Blah blah blah. Let's go on. All right. Shortly out, he goes through some bullet points here about communists in other countries. Oh God. The second one he gets to is Holodomor. I'm not kidding. Shortly after taking power in 1918, Vladimir Lenin, 1917, established a system of concentration and labor camps that would become known as the Gulag system. The camps would house not only criminals, but political dissidents and class enemies, a term that would apply to anyone who fell out of favor with the Communist Party. The network of camps eventually became a system of slave labor. At its height, the Gulag system consisted of as many as 30,000 individual camps. The system is estimated to have incarcerated around 18 million people throughout the Soviet Union over the course of several decades. Let me look something up real quick for you guys. How many prisoners in USA right now? Let's see. In 2011 alone, there was 1.5 million prisoners. It's just 1 year. Right now, the USA holds 25% of the entire world's prisoners, right? 25%. He says that this is a concentration and labor camp, which is called a Leither language, right? He's labeling it something that you are already predisposed to view negatively. What he doesn't tell you is at the time, every single industrialized country in the world used prison labor. It was seen as progressive. What it was sort of training criminals who it was assumed had no skills, a trade that they could, sell and get a job once they left prison. He says that this turns into slave labor. Notably, every single prisoner in the Soviet Union got paid the average wages in that industry, regular wages. Where do they not pay wages? Right here in the USA, which is one of the reasons communists are against these prisons for profit, right? It's that necessity of the logic of capital accumulation that leads to these impossible things to continue. Now, he said, like, I believe he quotes the Gulag Archipelago or whatever at some point, which is absurd. But I want to like really hammer that home. Here's the problem. A lot of the time, they'll take a true stat, right? I would believe 18 million people throughout the Soviet Union over the course of the existence of the Soviet Union, which he's going to say several decades over, rather than the entire span of the Soviet Union, or the prison labor system, which, by the way, was ended in 1950s, along with every other industrialized country in the world, except for ours, the USA. And I guarantee you, this mainstream media hack defends that prison slave labor. Yet right here, he's attacking the Soviets for it because it's a way he can demonize communism. Do you see the sort of way these lies work? They take everything out of context. They dehistoricize it and act as if it's uniquely evil rather than some necessity of the times, etc. Right after the American Revolution, or even before it, during it, do you know what the Sons of Liberty were doing to Tories? They were tarring and feathering them and leaving them in public squares as a warning to anyone who would stand against the revolution. They were capturing counter-revolutionaries. This is a revolutionary situation, Jesse. Especially in the early Soviet Union, when they were immediately invaded by over a dozen countries, then invaded by the Nazis. This wasn't just like, them deciding like everyone who isn't a communist, they're evil, blah, blah, blah. No, like this is ridiculous. Just taking everything out of context in order to promote this false narrative that communism is somehow evil for having a prison system that was the same as any other prison system at the time. And if you want to be very clear about it, much better than the American prison system. What year are we talking about? 1918. What was going on in 1918 in the U.S.? Jim Crow, American apartheid, segregation. So the notion that the communists need to be blamed for the gulags is absolutely absurd. It is painting a cartoon of reality at best and dishonesty at worst. But again, this guy's not going to care about the truth. He works for iHeart Media. The mainstream media does not want us to think critically, y'all. It doesn't want us to be able to actually be free thinkers. They want us to toe the narrative. You pick a side, Trump or anti-Trump, liberal or conservative, and then you argue with the other side over who's to blame while the elites laugh at you. That's what they want from us. This guy is just a part of lying to conservative America to get him to hate the wrong people. When there's a very clear enemy, Stalin ain't the one making it so groceries are overpriced and nobody can afford them. Stalin ain't the one stealing my tax money and sending it to Nazis in Ukraine. Stalin ain't the one carrying out a genocide in Palestine right now. Right? We have our own problems. And all of this is a distraction. It's meant to give you some sort of scapegoat for all that pent-up anger with the way the world is going. A righteous anger. To be given an outlet that aligns you with the elites. That tells you Congratulations. You're actually the free thinker, and it's the libs who got it all wrong. Congratulations. You're an enlightened lib, and it's the conservatives that got it all wrong. You guys should hate each other. Right? I'm sorry, but like, just think of the way DC works. Do y'all really, really think the Republicans and Democrats are enemies? They're all part of the same class. The same institutions are funding all of them. And guess what? 99% of elections in this country are won by the people who spend the most money. I'm just saying. Let's continue on. I'm having a little fun with this now. I'm getting in the swing of things. In 1932, Mr. Kelly says, Joseph Stalin, isn't he the guy that ate everybody's baby when they disagreed with him? And then their babies? Oh my God. He's going to talk about Stalin, guys. Okay. In 1932, Joseph Stalin targeted the Ukrainian people for their stubborn resistance to Soviet rule and agricultural collectivization. Law number one. The Ukrainian people, as such, have been, are not really like you have to understand what Ukraine is. What does Ukraine even mean? It means like frontier, right? It means borderland, the sort of like area between a bunch of different empires before the Soviet Union. It was Stalin's policies that sort of help actualize the Ukrainian people as a people, pushing their Ukrainian language in schools, pushing Ukrainian traditions, etc. This was Mao Zedong says it perfectly. Yes, hinterlands. That's exactly what it meant. Yeah, the outside, right? And so the sort of spirit of camaraderie between nations within the Soviet Union was a huge deal for the Bolsheviks. Their stubborn resistance to Soviet rule. What is he talking about? He's talking about the people that become the OUN and the Banderist Nazis. The organizations that when the Nazi Germans invade, get to Ukraine and tell them they were too extreme. Waffen SS divisions. Nazis is who they're talking about, right? And what happens is they know the Nazis are coming to invade. They need to industrialize now. And there was a rapid industrialization like the world had never seen. They begin collectivization of agriculture, right? Which is incentivized through the state. If you start a kolkhoz, which is the name for the collective farms, you get, seed subsidies and access to free tractors at like a sort of tractor library. They had all kinds of great stuff. So people start them left and right. Of course they do, right? And the kulaks, who were basically the people that get sort of when the area had their enclosures in the Kosygin reforms, or they sort of privatize all these lands and hand them to certain families. And the ones that get the really good lands and the most land end up being able to enrich themselves more and more to the point where they become money lenders, they become usurers, etc. Right? And they end up with Kwiwu. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing it. They were landlords, right? Kinda. They were definitely usurers like landlords, but not exactly. The word kulak actually means tight-fisted, right? It was a jab at them, saying they were all greedy, right? And so they had this big monopoly on grain. They were very, very upset that now all of these collective farms could undercut them. So they began sabotaging the collective farms, and it turns into this huge sort of fight between the kolkhozes and the kulaks. Wasn't started by Stalin or anything like that. In fact, Stalin was adamant about curbing the excesses against them. The kulaks were allowed to exist within the Soviet Union, sort of to the detriment of the Soviet Union for a very long time. He goes on, though, in order to break the Ukrainian people, which, by the way, you can always tell when someone is lying when what they're saying is reading someone's mind. Whereas, in order to break the Ukrainian people, as a reason, where is it written? Who said it? Who implied it? It never happened. He's making that up. Anyway, they set unrealistically high grain quotas. Now, that's just not true. They needed, as this sort of shortages because of bad weather mostly, and kulak sabotage, the fighting, etc. This all adds up to a really bad harvest year in 32, and the rest of the world knows this, right? So they begin demanding payment in grain, which the Soviets are trying to do at the same time as feed all of their people, and blah, 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 blah. You don't care about that. They get to, Kelly here gets to this thing called the law of 5 stalks of grain, right? The rule condemned anyone who took even a handful of grain, which was considered property of the state, to 10 years imprisonment or to death. An army of Soviet apparatchiks and secret police descended upon Ukrainian towns and villages. House-to-house searches were conducted, hidden grain stores were seized. This is just patently false. Now, theft was punished, absolutely. But harsh sentences was specifically for people that were not only stealing grain, but involved in sabotage, involved in Nazi organizing, etc. It was sort of all of these charges that added up, right? Now, guess what was punished even more harshly? Corruption. Anyone that would give people false arrest, blah, 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 they were punished even more harshly. I have a thing here. Let me look it up real quick. I apologize. I sort of have a whole bunch pulled up here. No. Oh, I'm so sorry. I actually have the original Soviet criminal code here. Unfortunately, it's in Russian, so not much I can do with that. But the Speaklets law, or the law of the five grain stalks. Let me look for what I'm looking for in practice. I'm so sorry. I have way too much pulled up here. Anyway, the first reference that I think he uses here is again from Solzhenitsyn. Let's just move on. So this is where he gets the Holodomor, right? Because this is the fun part. The 5 grain stalks thing is silly. The resulting famine, he says, came to be known as the Holodomor, which is Ukrainian for death by hunger. Ukraine's borders were closed off, not true, preventing food from being imported. Also, not true. The people became desperate, true, with some turning to cannibalism. I haven't actually even heard of that part, which is wild because I went through a thorough debunk of Holodomor a while ago. At its height, as many as 28,000 Ukrainians were per day dying of starvation. Families ate each other. Now, where is the primary source evidence for this. So he has a whole bunch of citing, like his stuff at the end. So I'm going to look for his sources in chapter 2. Because of course they're not listed. You see how he has it? They're just kind of all in a big list here rather than attached to the actual text. Chapter 5, 4, come on, 3. Chapter 2. All right. Oh no, I'm in chapter 1, right? Okay. Oh, I didn't even go over that stupid thing about so Marx had this weird disease that pained him his entire life. And Jesse Kelly just says he had bad hygiene, which is the silliest thing I've ever heard. Like, why do you make things up like that? Anyone can look it up and see it's not true. We have the internet. Unreal. Okay, so here is a letter to the United Nations in 2003 from the permanent representative of Ukraine. That's oh no, I think that's on the Great Leap Forward. Great. I'm not seeing anything on this Holodomor. Yeah. Okay, let's go back up to where we were. So I'll just sort of explain. The original sources for Holodomor are Nazis. It's what becomes the IUN, the Banderists, who are literally in a coup government in Ukraine right now, propped up by our ruling class. And it doesn't begin, when Russia invades, right? It doesn't. This begins a very long time ago, before even World War I, but where the U.S. is involved. It begins around the end of World War II, when basically our intelligence agencies began funding these stay-behind units out of, oh God, what was the name of it? It was part of the Polish Ukrainians, the something group. I forgot the name. Oh, well, it doesn't matter. Basically, they fund these Banderist scumbags since then, right? And the whole idea is to use them against the Soviets, and then it turns into using them against the Russians. This whole Holodomor, originally when it gets to the U.S., was kind of laughed out of popular culture. The only people running with it was one section of the mainstream media, the newspapers owned by Hearst, right? The guy that Rosebud is about, or Citizen Kane Rosebud, who was a fascist. And I don't mean like the guy hated labor unions. I mean like the guy hired Mussolini to write op-eds. Like, he was a fascist. He had a Moscow correspondent, right, who refused to work on this story that he'd concocted because it wasn't true, right? So he gets this guy who's going by the alias Thomas Walker. And if you look up Holodomor today, you'll still see the famous Walker photos. Now, it comes out in court when Thomas Walker goes to court for unrelated things. Very good guy, by the way. He was transporting women across state lines for the purposes of prostitution, violating an anti-slavery law, and marriage swindle. This is your primary source, and the photos he has are utterly absurd. There's like a little girl and then a boy who obviously is deformed in some way at a doctor's office. There's a photo of a man dead next to a horse, and it says that him and his horse starved together Why he didn't eat the horse, I have no idea. The guy's passport photo, like his passport stamps, don't line up with where he said he was or when. He was literally fired from multiple jobs in the Soviet Union for loafing. I mean, he was finally kicked out of the Soviet Union for trying to smuggle a white guard, a czarist white guard, into a factory for sabotage. Like, this is the primary source. I mean, come on. And basically, like all that aside, there's two competing theories for what actually happened in Ukraine that causes this tragedy, because it is a tragedy. And the local authorities did not do a great job at responding. In fact, there are telegrams in the Soviet archives of the Central Committee chewing them out for failing to address the problem efficiently, right? The idea that Stalin was like, oh, these Ukrainians, they're rebelling, we need to starve them all, just doesn't make sense when you actually study the history of the Soviet Union. Anyway, there's two competing theories. Well, first, they both sort of go with, there's many reasons this happened, right? Weather and kulak sabotage. Mark Tauger is an American famine expert, and he says this is mostly weather, but you cannot discount kulak sabotage. These guys were literally like leaving grain on the stalk to rot, burning fields, murdering collective farmers, right? They slaughtered literally over half the livestock in the country one year just to keep the prices at a point where they were making super profits. This is the lengths they went to. And again, these were Nazis. Very, very important. They were Nazis. It's unreal. Like, the idea that anyone believes the Holodomor mythology in 2024 just means they have not looked into the question. And this is always what it boils down to. Always, always, always. Have you ever said, is this true? And then done the work of digging to find out. That's it. That's all you really need to do. That's all I did. That's all anyone does. And if you do that, you come to these same conclusions. Sorry, I'm pouring some more coffee. And dropping my thermostat. I apologize. Anyway, so it's wild to me that kind of thing can just go about just unquestioned. Completely unreal. If you're looking for a really good sort of fair history of the Stalin era of the Soviet Union, Domenico Lacerdo wrote a book called Stalin. I have it right here. History and Critique of a Black Legend. This is the fairest and most sort of in-depth analysis of the Stalin era, all of the mythology and the real critiques of Stalin, all in one place that I've ever read. Lacerdo is absolutely brilliant. I don't care who you are. The problem is when you're going by these preconceptions that the mainstream media, who, let's not forget, Jesse Kelly works for, I'm not going to leave that fact alone. When they're creating all these preconceptions and you're trained to just memorize and verify preconceptions, you never question it. And they tell you that is free thinking. That ain't free thinking. That's thinking what you're told. How can you call yourself a free thinking individual if you're towing the establishment line? If you don't believe the mainstream media, which you should not, why are you just trusting this guy that works for iHeart Media? Why are you just trusting Sheldon Adelson? Why are you just trusting Rachel Maddow, whoever it is, right? What you should do instead is know that you are smart enough to think critically about anything and look for the facts. That's all you need to do. Unreal. All right, he goes into like, I don't know anything about Romania, so I'm not going to comment on that. I'm going to assume that it's the same sort of thing that he's been doing this whole time. Now, I can't say that for a fact, as I've never studied Romania or Cambodia, which he goes into before that, other than to know that it was the Vietnamese that stopped Pol Pot. Communists did, right? This thing isn't black and white. Just because someone says they're a communist doesn't mean they are, and doesn't mean they're, doing a great thing, right? Anyway, here's where he's going to go into America. Thankfully, America was spared the horrors that many other nations experienced, he says. Our unique history, one that valued individual liberty and the Christian faith, proved an effective fortification against communism's rapid advance. Our nation was founded on a freedom of religion. That was one of the most progressive things about the 1776 revolution. It wasn't based on the Christian faith at all. It was based on the fact that you should be able to, and this is part of individual liberty, by the way, something communists believe in. You should be able to practice whatever religion you want so long as you ain't hurting nobody. And that should hold true to everything, right? We get thrust into this situation, however, where we are not free to do what we want, where the ruling class is, and that freedom is taken from us by them. Yep, I know exactly what you're saying, Kiwu. Anyway, he says the American communist is not some different, more genteel breed. While the communists failed to bring about the drama he created throughout Europe and Asia, he was nonetheless hard at work in America, subverting resistance to his religion. You see how they do this sort of like repetition of language lies? Religion. It just gets sort of machine gunned at you. It's ridiculous. He says that communists, infiltrated every major American government agency of military or diplomatic importance, and they were all working on behalf of the Soviet Union. Now, there is one thing, and this is one of the critiques American communists today have of the old Communist Party. While the sort of American pragmatism is a big part of our social consciousness, right? It was pragmatic to have the Soviets help us get our party started. Unfortunately, this turned into, honestly, doing whatever the Soviets told us, and it stagnated our development. It stagnated our theory. The first big exodus from the Communist Party was when people sort of came to the realization that we were a Soviet party, right? That we were sacrificing our country's working class interests for theirs. Now, there were reasons for doing this. The fascists were about to invade the Soviet Union. It was sort of all out to defend the leading figures of the whole world's movement, right? But it did sacrifice American working class interests, and this pissed people off. And they weren't wrong to be pissed off. A lot of the big problem is that trying to think of a good way to say this. The working class, the proletariat, as Marx calls it, arises in different forms in different societies and different times, right? What is universal is that we arise in contradiction to that bourgeois class, right? Because they exist, they need us to exist. Now, our interests all align as working class people. Materially speaking, we all align, but we can be put in these situations where our interests are forced to conflict. Anyway, he's going to go into the House Un-American Activities Committee, right? Where basically, let's just read. I mean, he goes into the Rosenbergs, and this is interesting because the Rosenbergs were charged with stealing the secrets that led to the Soviets to be able to build an atomic bomb and match our country, right? Now, if they hadn't done this, and it turns out later that Julius probably did, right? There was this CIA operation that got declassified later, and it came out. But that Ethel, his wife, had no idea, right? And the letters they sent back and forth over the years, long after this was all settled, pretty much show us that she had no idea, even though they locked her up for it. Anyway, if they hadn't done this, imagine what our ruling class would have done without that sort of counterbalance. I mean, they already proved that they would nuke people. Imagine if no one had nukes. They would be invading people left and right. Once the UN was established, the first few actions were the Soviets vetoing our ruling class wanting to invade people. One of the most famous parts of HUAC, or the House Un-American Activities Committee. Let's explain what this is, basically. It was a witch hunt, right? Led by Joseph McCarthy, saying everyone and their mother was a communist. Communists are all these evil things. This guy's saying, let's weed them out, and, sort of very Nazi-like. No one's allowed to think anything they want. We need to, crack down on people's freedom in the name of freedom. One of the most famous ones who got pulled up on this is Paul Robeson. And he said something that sticks with me. At the end of his thing, he gives us like a very passionate response. And he says that the communists are the most patriotic people he's ever met, and the best Americans he's ever met. And he says that it's the House Un-American Activities Committee who are the anti-patriots, and they are the anti-Americans, and they should be ashamed. They betrayed everything they supposedly say they stand for. Individual liberty. Well, do we have that or not? Right? Because right now, you're persecuting us for ideas. And let's not forget, this is in the era of Jim Crow, before the Civil Rights Revolution. The idea that they're talking about individual liberty is absurd. Who can fulfill this individual liberty? Who can fulfill the progressive notions that our bourgeois revolution was fought for? Right? Who can fulfill that promise of a government of, by, and for the people? Only the working class can. Because we don't have the same need to keep everybody else making us rich. What we say is that we're working for what we get. Everybody should. Right? That's in all of our interests. To stop that exploitation, and this is spelled out by Marx. Anyway, I'm going to skip past this because it's kind of boring. Blah, 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 blah. Okay. So just who is today's communist, Mr. Kelly asks. In short, the communist is who he's always been. A subversive, chipping away at the pillars that hold up American society. There's no need for communists to chip away at these pillars. There really isn't. They're falling apart under the weight of our establishment. That's what's happening. We're just pointing that out and saying we, the people, deserve better. We, the people, deserve more than getting sort of sucked dry by these globalist elites, Mr. Kelly, who don't care about this country at all. who sit on top of it like a leech, sucking everything out, and giving nothing back, thinking they are entitled to what we create. We do the work, not them. Not a single one of them has worked a day in their life. I mean, let's be real about this. He calls communists these lazy, entitled, wanting what everybody else, thinking they're entitled to work other people have done to create. That's precisely what we call your boss. They are the parasite, not us. We are working for what we get. You cannot say the same about the man you work for, and that you would so easily touch your toes for him. Just let him do it. And not only let him do it, but encourage him to do it. Encourage everyone else to let him do it. Shows me you have no spine at all, and that's why you can't stand up tall. And I think I'm going to leave it there for today. We're going to go through this whole book, though. And we're going to go bit by bit. I'm even going to get his sources, and we're going to line them up. Because this time I was just going in blind. I sort of skimmed it and began reading. I wanted to be able to genuinely react rather than, making it fake and doing some performance where I'm surprised at what he's doing, right? Next time, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure I have all of his sources lined up. And we're going to go through them. And I'm going to prove all of this stuff is a lie. Now, I want to go over a little bit more first, though, right? Because what he says next is the dumbest thing. And they all play on these tropes. Right? He says, all right, in the 21st century, the communist does not necessarily adhere to a rigid set of principles and doctrines like those who came before him. Now, if he would have bothered learning what Marxism is, he would know that Marxism is incredibly dynamic and moves and changes to fit the situation, that we have a concept of universal and particular, right? That our entire logic, dialectical logic, is dynamic like that, just inherently. It's about development, right? It takes the development of a thing as its premise, right? It's motion, it's change. So the idea that there's this like sort of ossified doctrine that we follow like that, the way he's using this language is just absurd. You can't understand what Marxism is and say that. Here's my thing. If you're going to criticize a thing, learn what it is you're criticizing. This guy, I mean, let's be real. He gets paid to do this, and I think that's all it is. But he's convincing people to dedicate their lives to a thing without even understanding what that thing is. That's insane. That is absolutely insane. Anyway, he continues on. He'd be hard-pressed to recite Marx chapter and verse. He's also unlikely to voice his support for many past communist regimes like Stalin's Soviet Union or Pol Pot's Cambodia. After all, that wasn't real communism, he'll assure you. This lie works on multiple levels. First, he's confusing liberals, etc. And you have, like this, I'll forgive him because you have to really know the history of the falsification of Marxism and communism to understand this. And for anyone looking into it, we have an interview with Gabriel Rockhill where he goes over a very basic gist of this on our YouTube channel. Please check that out. But beginning in the interwar period, really, even before that, the ruling class is sort of trying to fight the working class rising up and demanding things as best it can. And a big chunk of this is communism, right? And a big chunk of this is anybody even remotely sympathetic to the Soviet Union, because it was an example of a working class that stood up and overthrew the ruling class. right? Where the majority actually took power. So all this has to be lied about, blah, blah, blah. And what better way to do that than to take the real substance of communism? And I'll tell you straight up, Stalin's Soviet Union was absolutely real communism. The problem is you've just been lied to about its history. Anyway, what better way to sort of propagandize against it than you take communism, the word, and put it on the substance of something else, right? Left wing sounding liberalism, right? A radical liberalism that was harshly critical of all existing communism, had no idea what Marx ever said or wrote, just like this guy says, but could be called communism. That way you take what's real and you completely remove it from the conversation, right? And people have to actually unpeel the distortion onion to get at the truth. This begins, one of the first big ones was the Frankfurt School. Now, people like Jesse Kelly and iHeart Media will tell you that the Frankfurt School were communists who just switched how Marxism looks at everything. And I'll explain like the sort of difference in short now. But what the Frankfurt School did was completely condemn Marxism entirely, saying that Marxism was conservative, was Eurocentric, blah, blah, blah. They were rabid anti-communists. They hated everything the Soviet Union did. They criticized Ho Chi Minh and the Vietnamese Revolution. They were pro-Vietnam War, etc. If you look at Herbert Marcuse, he's just, one of the best examples. His sort of magnum opus is a book called One Dimensional Man. Look at the acknowledgments page. It is a who's who list of CIA brass, State Department heads, Rockefeller Foundation, Ford Foundation, etc. fellows. It's literally put on and funded by the establishment. Marcuse went to Columbia and started their Sovietology department, their anti-communism school. I mean, the notion that all of this is Marxism is absurd. And here's the theoretical problem. What they say is that these guys turn into cultural Marxism. There's no such thing. There's Marxism and there's not Marxism, right? Marxism, as I was discussing earlier, views a sort of point of humanity where we become human is our ability to do labor, to change nature into something for us, right? Where it ceases becoming a thing outside of us and becomes a thing for us. And this makes us human. It's sort of our being as humans is the ongoing development of how this happens, right? And for Marxism, culture, all the things within this are reflections of a certain way a certain society goes about reproducing itself as society, how production happens, right? So when the modern sort of anti-communist left call us, class reductionists, etc., this is basically saying, hey, we're not Marxist. Because for Marxism, it's all sort of whittled down to this, and then we sort of expand outward from there, right? Marx calls his process the ascension to the concrete. We, as a people, are concretized through all of the various historical determinations that build who we are, that build the world around us, that create you and me. That's the Marxist, right? That you can't change things just by changing culture. That's silly. Culture instead is downstream of humanity as humanity at a certain level of development. Here, let's get off this screen share because I'm done with this. So everything that comes like from these culturalists, etc., are rabidly anti-communist, right? The notion that this is Marxism just shows us that he has no idea what Marxism is. And we're going to get into that and more next time, y'all. Thank you for being with me on the first episode of the Anticommunist Manifesto is Bullshit with Nuho Krashivik. We'll see you guys next time. We're going to go out same way we always do with the International. Oh, and before we go, I really want to, we recently had Google AdSense censor us and demonetize us. So as y'all may know, we are completely 100% people funded. If you want to help us out, please visit our Patreon at patreon.com/MidwesternMarks. Anyway, tomorrow, I haven't confirmed it yet, but I'm hoping Osiris and I are going to get together again to have another Marxism meets MAGA. So that'll be fun. Otherwise, I'll see you for the next time we do this, which will be next week. Same time, same day, Monday. And for Real Talk, which will be starting up very soon. We got everything over to switch our software and everything. So again, thank you all very much. See you next time.
And economic injustice cannot be solved without a radical redistribution of political and economic power.